Howdy, howdy, and welcome. We are actually starting Workshop Wednesday right now. We are going to do a What's New, and we're going to do updates and features released in 2020. So looking forward to getting everybody caught up on the last 30 days of what's new and exciting in the world of measurement, specifically with Google. Of course, my name is Chris Mercer. Actually, do go by Mercer, and I'm the co-founder here at measurementmarketing.io, where it's our job to help you figure out how to use these tools. And maybe you've come to us through the podcasts and talks that we've done, maybe from the other programs that we've offered through other platforms like these, and maybe even you're already a member at measurementmarketing.io. However you got here, welcome. Again, it's our job to help you understand how to use these tools. And this particular workshop, we do this once a month. This What's New workshop is the one that you pay attention to if you're trying to get caught up on the latest and greatest stuff. You just want to sort of see if there's anything major that you should be playing around with these tools, specifically new features and updates. So you're going to, if that's what you're looking for, you are in the right spot. Now, we always cover this every single workshop that we do because it does help put the training in context. Remember, there's 5 key pillars to the measurement marketing framework. The first is planning, where you figure out what questions are important, what information you need to get those answers, what actions you're going to take based on the answers. Then it's build out, where you're actually using the tools. Now, what we're talking about today, obviously some of the features you'll be able to use and build. You'll also be able to use the reporting ones, mostly because Data Studio, of course, has even more changes. So that platform always, every month, there's always something new there. Forecasting is where you have, once you have your benchmarks, you can actually start to look to your near future and start to predict with some reasonable usefulness what's about to happen in your own marketing results. And then ultimately you measure against those, and that's how you know where to optimize and figure out what's working and what's not. All right, now with all of these workshops, just remember, pick up one new thing, one new idea. In the case of features, there's a lot that won't apply directly to the stuff that you're doing. To be honest, there's stuff that doesn't apply to what we're doing and how we're using the tools currently. So those, you just sort of go like, okay, cool, that's good to know, and then you move on. If there is something that you are using, though, try to force yourself, and I'll specifically say something like Data Studio. If you're using Data Studio, try to force yourself to use the tool and to practice it a little bit, whatever this new feature is or update that you pick up, because the sooner that you can actually practice it, get some updates and make it your own skill, the better it's going to be for you. All right, let's go ahead and get started, shall we? What's new? Updates and features released in July 2020. Now we're going to go ahead and just dive right on in. And I'm going to start this one just a little bit differently than we normally do. Normally we dive in with like features and updates and everything else. I wanted to cover this because it is a recent blog post, actually a blog post they did in July. So that's why it covers for this particular period, the last 30 days. But this was something that I thought was important to mention because lots of people have talked about this stuff and like, how does analytics handle GDPR and compliance and data privacy, and how do you do that, and controllers versus processors and all the other mess that is data privacy. Like, it is just talk about a moving target. Like, that's always going to change. But, and this is very important, I'm going to zoom in here so you can at least kind of see this. And again, if you need to get this, just go to blog.google to go to the marketing platform, and you'll see this post there. But the idea is that Google is understanding that they need to give you the ability to be able to delete some data, to get rid of some data on occasion, because your users may ask you to, hey, I want you to forget about me. And you've got to be able to do that. And that really hasn't been the easiest thing in the world. So I wanted to cover some of the ones that are low-hanging fruit that maybe you didn't know that you could do. So one, I would say, go through this. Just go to the marketing platform blog. You'll see this is the first post in July. They actually don't update the blog very often, so it'll probably be out there for a little while. But go through this so you understand kind of what's there. And then I wanted to actually show you a couple of places that you can look to get rid of data. Remember, this is not an update because this technically has been out there. It's just that I think this conversation is coming back again, and Google is working on some updates with app and web properties. So right now we're looking at like the typical Google Analytics that you're using, probably Universal Analytics. I wanted to make sure you knew about this. This actually was covered in an update we did a while back, but you have data deletion requests. So you can go in here and ask Google to remove some data if you accidentally collect some personal identifiable information. But specific to your users. So if you come in your user audience reports here, you can go into your user explorer report, which I don't really think is personally all that useful as a report because it's just the sample size is too small. But you can come in and pick a particular user. You have to know the client ID. But if you know the client ID, some sort of identification, if you're using user ID tracking, you'll actually have that set up in your user ID views. So you would pull in the user, and then you can actually delete the user from here. So you can come in, you can say delete user, and then all that user's data goes away. So if you are trying to get rid of somebody specific, you have to know how to identify them, of course. And remember, you shouldn't be able to do it by email because that's PII, personally identifiable information. So you would need like their client ID or, some other way of referencing them. Probably if you're using user ID setups, your CRM might have a contact for them and you can use that. But you first find them, come in User Explorer report and you can delete them from there. So know that is possible. So you can't get rid of that because again, it's our job to be able to, or we would need to be able to have that flexibility to do that. And Google is continuing to roll that ability out. So I wanted to make sure that you knew that. All right. So then next up, enough about the data privacy and everything else. Just know that's a thing. Also know apps and web properties, which are completely different. Remember, if you haven't used this, it's radically different. In fact, it is a completely new platform. That's how you look at this. It's a completely different platform. Same name, completely different build. And you can see it looks different. Reports are different. Everything's different. It works differently. The setup is different. It is 100% different. The only thing it's got, actually 99.9%, because it maintains the analytics name. But that's it. Everything else is different. So in here, a couple of things. One is, and these were changes that came out to this. So one is data privacy. They don't have the ability to necessarily go in there and delete stuff yet, but they will. So they're adding that, and they're probably going to do it on a more granular basis, I would imagine, because they're building this from the ground up. So expect to see that. And then a couple other things that came out with this side of things is there are new metrics that are available that they're getting into. Now, those of you with high traffic, you'll be able to probably see these now. In our case, we're just not a high traffic site. We need to have lots of data for some of this, what they call predictive metrics. That's kind of the new thing. So these predictive metrics, the way that they work is it will actually say, oh, here are the people who are most likely to buy within 7 days. Again, based on machine learning, so take it with a grain of salt, but test it out. In our case, we don't see those back here. Even if I want to go create a new audience, I don't see them back here. And the reason is because you have to have 1,000 sample size of basically 1,000 people, 1,000 data points that show like who's likely to purchase, who's not likely to purchase. It needs to have massive data to be able to figure that out. So if you're a high traffic site, you probably already see this back here. If you're not, you may not see something like that. So just sort of keep that in mind, and which I don't think is horrible because you can still measure that stuff the old-fashioned way by saying, oh, people that are likely to buy are people that maybe, come in my cart and then don't purchase, or show some sort of interactivity on, investigating the offer, but they don't buy. Like, there's lots of ways that you can get there. You don't have to use the AI stuff. And I think, in my own opinion, I think some of the AI and machine learning stuff can jump the shark a little bit. People rely too much on that. And you don't want to outsource that. Like, think it through, because you actually start to understand your audience a little better when you do measure for certain behaviors. But know that it's coming down the pike. So the whole predictive analytics thing is coming down. They're also going to be improving their cohort reports. So if you use those, you'll have those ability. Now, some of that's going to be in the analysis section. When you come through, you'll see cohort analysis that comes through. And you'll be able to build different cohort reports and everything else coming through. So you'll have that. Again, it depends. I don't actually like using analytics for cohort reporting because typically I'm looking for some sort of retention metric or a churn metric with billing, some sort of recurring billing system, and it's LTV numbers and lifetime value, that sort of stuff. I pull that from my CRM, and we do that with spreadsheets. But if you want to get general trends as far as maybe returning users as Google identifies a user, so keep that stuff in mind. You could do that. So just know that that's back here, and they're expanding that out. I do not think it's the perfect system by any means, but the fact that when you look at what was done in the last 30 days and what was done with regular Google Analytics, the universal analytics, and then what was done with this one, you see app and web is the one they're putting the energy into. And I say this every single month, and I have probably for the last 8 months, because that's what's been happening. Every single month, more things get pushed into app and web. Now remember, this is still generally beta. The whole platform is beta. You are not to create this and install this and put your implementation into this new system and stop using the other one, because this is not powerful enough yet. I don't think it's not useful enough to be able to use it on a day-to-day basis. But if you have not, and this is something I've been saying for the last few months, but I'm going to say it again, if you have not set this up for your own site, if you don't have app and web at least in place, and we don't use this at all on a day-to-day basis, not at all. And I don't expect to for the rest of this year at a minimum, but you got to have experience with it, and you got to start to see what's back here and start playing with things, because it works differently and you need to get experience with it. So eventually, and again, if you're not the one doing the implementation, if you're a strategy person, don't worry about it. Like I wouldn't even worry about it. But if you're an implementation person and you're the one responsible for getting the numbers, you got to start getting used to this stuff, because app and web is going to be a thing, and it's going to be a thing bigger and bigger every day with what's out there and what's available to it. So the sooner you get it started collecting data and you start poking around stuff, the better. And of course, we'll be doing a new win course for it at measurementmarketing.io probably later on this year. We'll do our redo, because this is one of those platforms that as soon as you create a course for it, it's pretty much out of date because they're changing it so quickly. But it's something you should take a look at. All right, next up, and I'm going to cover this one by moving into, that was kind of it for analytics. There really wasn't a whole lot with Tag Manager this past 30 days, but Data Studio, of course, came out with more. Now, one of them, and this is why I'm showing you this, is a improving Data Studio performance help support doc that they put in here. So improving Data Studio performance. Now, why did they do this? Because they have heard the entire market loud and clear saying Data Studio is too slow. They've heard you. They've heard me, they've heard everybody. So they understand Data Studio can go a little slower than you would like it to go to sometimes. When you load up a report, it just takes more than a few seconds to load up. That can feel like an eternity, right? We're all very spoiled by how fast data normally comes in. Data Studio is a little clunky. So they came up with some ways, which these have all existed, but they're putting them into one spot. So I wanted to cover them here because this is a new post. This is a new support doc that they made available, but basically saying, listen, like, this is what causes the problem. It's probably not network latency in most cases. It's probably something around this. This would be my guess, is in most cases, it's the amount of data being queried by the visualizations and the complexity of the queries. It's those two things most of the time. So they've kind of come through and said, here's some things you should take a look at. This is the low-hanging fruit of how to make your reports faster, including data freshness rate, which again has been there forever, but now you can go in there and you can adjust that. Sorry, you should go in there and adjust that. It's always been a thing, but you make sure you look at it. And you can extract data. Now, this has also been a thing, and I'll show you these in just a second. But extracted data is where you say, okay, go into analytics, but only pull out page views and users and the dates, because that's all I'm using. So when you're building a Data Studio report, you need to ask yourself, the data source that you're connecting to, are you basically ignoring 80% of what it's giving you? Because if you are, Data Studio is going in there and washing through all that data to build the reports. But if it doesn't need 80% of it, then why do that? And that's what extracted data sources allow you to do. Again, these are not new. These have been around for a while, just people aren't using them. And I think that's what Data Studio, kind of Team Data Studio, if I'm on their team, that's what I'm thinking, like, wow, we have these things to help people make things faster, but maybe they just don't know about them. So let's put them all in one spot. So data freshness is one, extracted data source is the other, and then moving maybe to BigQuery and doing that. Now, we're actually looking at doing this too with some of our data, more just to kind of practice it and get a feel for it to see if it's something that's going to be super useful for us, because we're still using extract and spreadsheets and stuff like that as well. That can help with that because they're just a little bit faster. But this is something else to take a look at. So if you're not looking at something like BigQuery or using BI Engine, you might want to take a look at that. So just something else to be aware of. And that's why really I wanted to cover this here. It was a post that actually came out in July, so it is over the last 30 days. But it's really just talking about how do you speed things up, because they understand that's an issue, which also means for us, at least for me, it means, okay, they get it. Like, they know there's an issue here. They're constantly working on it. It's not like they're ignoring it. They're not happy with the speed either. And while we as builders, people who are building the reports, are kind of doing this stuff to make sure that we're trying to help it go faster, at the same time, they're doing their thing, right? They're also trying to improve it as they go. Okay, so let's take a look at some other things that actually happened in Data Studio. So enough about analytics. We'll move into Data Studio here. So a few things. I'm going to show you. Let me see if I can pull up one of our data sources. So we're just going to go, I'm going to go up here. Let's go to Resource, Manage Added Data Sources. Let's edit some of these analytics data sources. Should be back here. So as you come on, you can go to edit your data source. You'll see where it says data freshness. That's where that is. So this is like every 12 hours by default, it sort of refreshes itself, or every 4 every hour. If you don't need it every hour, maybe you don't have to do that, right? So that's kind of what this is. It just sort of goes and pulls a query to connect the dots. That's essentially what it's doing, just to make sure your data is fresh. So just know that that's a thing. The more often you pull it, the more likely it's going to be slower. Just keep that in mind. The other thing that they talked about was, and I'm going to go to add a new data source. Let's do that here. So extracting data. So how do you extract data? You go in here to extract data, and this is the connector that you use. And then you say, okay, it wants to know, where do you want to go? What data source are you going to pull from? And you can put in any of your data sources that exist. So it's any of the data sources you currently have connected. It goes through there, and you say, again, I'm going to pull from this one, and then it says, okay, what fields do you want to do? Remember I said that's the whole point of extract data, is to say, just do these things. I don't want everything from Google Analytics. I just want certain things. And so you can, pull in certain details. You just sort of drag and drop as they're going through, right? So you can pull in the metrics you need, the dimensions you need, just obviously type in what you're looking for, drag and drop, pull them over. And then you're building a brand new data source that is connected to the original data source, but it's just extracting a few things from that, whatever you need from that, and that's it. And so it's faster. That's what makes it a lot faster. The difference is you got to think ahead. And this goes back to that planning step that we always talk about. You got to think ahead and think, okay, what's the information I need to be able to display to get the answers I want? Because if you forget something, you got to go back and set up the extraction again. You got to adjust that, because if you don't have, let's say you wanted users by date. Well, I didn't have date in here. So it's like, how does it know what date is, right? You got to come in and put in the date, which again, it's just looking for it and pulling it in. But that's the sort of stuff you want to make sure, okay, I'm practicing this a little bit, expect there's going to be a little wobbliness when you come up with this, but then you treat the extracted data source just like a regular data source. Just remember, it's not technically like its own real data source. It's connected to something else. It gets its data from something else. So always just sort of keep that in mind. But the idea is that it's pulling the data, it keeps it in memory. It's a little faster to load, and it's probably the fastest thing you can do to get an immediate boost to the speed of your reports. So again, that's not a new feature. That's been around for a long, long while now, many, many moons. But it is something that people, I think, just don't use. And so we want to make you aware of that, and just sort of, especially under this whole guise of them rewriting that support doc to say, listen, there are ways to make this thing faster. Okay, a couple other things in Data Studio. And this is just, some of this is more cosmetic and a little more organizational than anything. There wasn't anything super major in terms of styles of reports or charts or anything like that. But you can now come in here and you right click on a particular item, a little chart widget. You can go to select and say, okay, you have two options. This is the new part. You can say select, and I can say all the scorecards or all the charts that happen to use this data source. So if I go to scorecards, it just highlights all the scorecards. I can drag and drop, do whatever I want, kind of automatically grouping them, or at least temporarily doing that. Kind of like a select all, like if you were to draw a box around them, right? That sort of thing. The other thing that I can do is right click, go to select, and say charts with this data source. So now these are all the charts that use this data source in common. So if I wanted to change something with those charts, I could go through and I could do that. So now, because they're all grouped up, so maybe I want to switch data sources or something, I guess I could do that. So just a couple of things just from an organizational standpoint. The other thing is there is a new color picker style. So if you use colors a lot, let's come down here. When you go into your color picker, this is the part that's normal. The thing that's changed is down here under the custom. When you click the plus, it's this now. So you can get really specific. So if you've always had, maybe because sometimes you use like a color picker extension or something like that, it'll return with a hexadecimal. Well, now you can just pop that hex code in there, and then RGB if you need to, but typically the hex code, and it takes you right to whatever you need, and you can set it up. So just know that you can do that. You can also do transparencies, and change hues, all that fun stuff. So you've got access to a much more advanced ability to select colors. I personally have never needed that when it comes to Data Studio, but I am not a designer when it comes to Data Studio. So I am sure the designers of you out there will love that, because you can get really specific and do some cool stuff with it. So know that that is now a thing. And if you have a designer on your team who's like, man, I wish they could do more things with this, like just show them that so that they know they can do that. So that was really the biggest things that have come from this. Now, the only other update that you might run into a little bit is the sample update. The sample data sources have changed a little bit. So when you come into, let me just go into this, we'll go into data source. So when you come into your data sources, you can go in, you can pull in sample data, right? You always have the sample data that's here. They have recently updated this. Last couple of weeks, this got updated. So some things were removed because this was literally not connecting to a real analytics account. It's just a database of sample analytics stuff. So there were a couple of things that were just really old things that nobody uses anymore that they've deprecated long ago, that they've removed out of the data set. Average position for an auction and average position and stuff like that is gone now. So that was for Google Ads. They've done that. For Google Analytics, same thing, right? They've adjusted some things in the sample data set to sort of give it a freshness. So if something broke, and this is kind of the moral of the story, if you're using it in any way, using sample Google Analytics data or sample Google Ads data, right, which is typically this AdWords, but it'll say Google Ads data, then this is you want to maybe just refresh your reports or reconnect them, because there are some things specific to that Google Ads, like average position for auction or average position, that just aren't used anymore. So it may have broken some of the charts if you are connecting to sample data. So again, that's not going to be everybody, but for those of you who are doing that, you will see all of a sudden gray blocks and go, what happened? And, because I didn't change anything in data source, that may have been what it was. So just sort of keep that in mind. And then there were also a couple of fields that were new in Google Ads data source, like the traditional Google Ads data source. Now you've got keyword text and the position above rate, they call it. So you have that as well. So a little bit more information coming through Google Ads if you're doing a lot of Google Ads reporting. Other than that, the final bit of organization, remember I said this month was a lot of organizational stuff. It was a lot of the infrastructure things, nothing too terribly sexy in terms of design or anything like that. But the final thing was, those of you, if you're like us, we use a Google Suite admin to do all of our emails and everything else. We have a paid Google account essentially as a company. And so that migration is now there. So now you've got this migration that's available when it comes to actually setting that up. So you can actually go through and you can see in your Google admin, you can transfer ownership. You didn't used to be able to do that with Data Studio files because it wasn't part of that Google Drive interface. Now you can. So you have to do this, I believe, in Google admin. So if anybody leaves your organization, you need to transfer over ownership to somebody else that's under your same email. You can do that. Your admins can do that as well. So that was something else just to keep in mind when it came to that. All right. With that, I believe that covers the majority of the updates for this month. What was your one thing? I think for me, it's always been this idea that apps and web is continuing to go forward, but it was a reminder for me in terms of data deletion and the different ways that I currently have control to do data deletion, which was good. So I have that. Incidentally, apps and web just added bot filtering too. So now they automatically remove bots. In regular analytics, you have to select it to do that. You have to tell it to remove bots. But in the new and improved analytics, this app and web analytics that's coming out, you don't have to do that. It just does it for you, and you cannot turn it off. So just keep that in mind too. So lots of cool things that have come through. Again, a lot of infrastructure, which makes sense because let's face it, Team Google is pretty much working from home right now, as are the rest of us for the most part. So it's good that they're kind of working through. This is vacation for those of us who could take it, or even people that can go anywhere, even if you could take it. I don't know where you would go, but they're working hard. They're just doing a lot of infrastructure stuff. I would expect you would see a lot of more of the visual things coming forward later on this year. So I look forward to those. Now, if you are not yet trained and you want to get a little bit of training when it comes to learning how to use analytics and Tag Manager and Data Studio and learning measurement strategy or anything else, just go to measure.tips/courses. You'll see lots of information on the courses that we offer there. Happy to have you there as a member. Also, next week's topic, remember we do these workshops each and every week. We rotate through the topic. So this week is what's new. Next week, we go for the beginners. So we're going to talk to those of you who are beginners. It's a topic for you. Getting started is what we call that. And next week, we're going to talk about using Google Sheets with Data Studio, how to connect them and some cool tricks you can do with Google Sheets as a data source in Data Studio. So you'll learn all about that. Remember, if you want these videos each and every week, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you are notified that they are available. So make sure that you do that. Now, the other way that you can do that is becoming part of Workshop Wednesday, which happens to be in the Measurement Marketing Toolbox membership. So we've got lots of tools back there. Workshop Wednesday is one of them. We have the Traffic Tracking Toolkit. We've got GTM Cookbook for those of you a little bit more advanced. Lots of stuff. So whether you're just starting out, literally just found out that measurement was a thing and you want to learn some stuff, the Toolbox is a great place to be. If you are more advanced, the Toolbox is a great place to be because we've got more advanced tools that are back there. There's actually over 40. This doesn't show them all. This is just 8 of the 40 some odd tools that are back there. It's completely free. That membership is at measurementmarketing.io. It's called the Toolbox membership. You just need to go to measure.tips/ww. That will take you to the right spot so that you can create your account there. And with that, we'll go ahead and bring this one officially to a close. This has been What's New? Updates and features released in July 2020. Thanks again for watching this workshop, and we will see you on the next one. Take care.